chapter 9 in the book of Mark tonight. They named it the Transfiguration. We actually read verse 1 last week, so we'll go to verse 2 and 3. Now after 6 days, Jesus took Peter, James, and John and led them up on a high mountain apart by themselves, and he was transfigured before them. His clothes became shining, exceedingly white, like snow, such as no longer on earth can whiten them. And I know we talked about this in Matthew a little bit, but this is a time where he only took these three, Peter, James, and John, and the commentary was kind of interesting. They varied all over the place. Some of them say, well, these are the inner three, and I understand that. And some of them said, well, these are the three most likely to get in trouble. So he kept them close. And that happens sometimes. They may be the inner three, but they still get in trouble a lot. We see that on kind of the chosen. It kind of displays that. So I don't know where they get that stuff from, but it's an interpretation, I'm sure. But they went up into a high mountain apart from themselves. There's only a couple of what I would consider mountains. They call them mountains, Mount Gilboa, Mount Tabor, Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is probably the one that you would think of as a mountain there. You can look up to the north when you're up in Galilee and see it. It rises up. It's got snow on it most of the time. I got a picture from somebody over there on Facebook that I'm friends with that they were still playing in some snow up on Mount Tabor. And it doesn't snow a lot around Israel, but down in the lower levels. But they're way up high. I don't think it was there. Some of them think it was in Mount Hermon. Some people think the location was. It doesn't really matter, but they took them up into the mountain set apart. I think Matthew puts a little more emphasis on it, or gives us a little more detail that the guys fell asleep. Well, they fall asleep a lot, I mean, when he takes them to the garden and takes them, I know it was probably a chore, but Jesus probably slept less than they did because he was always praying, it seems like. But anyway, they came up there and they saw him transfigured. What do you think that means? What do you interpret that to mean in your mind?
I think the glory of the Lord shone.
That's exactly right. This is much like Moses going up into the mountain and talking with God. And when he came down, the glory of the Lord was so much on him, what they call the Shekinah glory. It shone on him so much. It's the same, it's the same thing as what led them as a fire by night and a cloud by day. That cloud was the Shekinah. When it entered the temple for the first time, and the priest couldn't go into it because it was so spectacular and glorious that it ran them out. This is what it was. He had changed back to his pre-human self. Okay? Because it talks about his raiment was white as snow. I mean, it's whiter than white. Now, you walk around in a desert, you're probably not going to be walking around in a white robe, are you? That's why on the chosen, they're showing them in the drab brown and stuff, because when they get dirty, you can't really tell. Because they're going to get dirty. They're going to get, So this is the way that it was probably for them to show them who he was. And then, of course, we get it goes into it. Brother Epson, you want to read that verse 4? It's on the next page. Excuse me. About halfway down.
And Elijah appeared to them with Moses, and they were talking with Jesus.
Okay, so here again we see two Two people. What's interesting here, and they think, I've said this before, they think Mark, the book of Mark, was written from Peter's occurrence. Mark wasn't around during this time. Okay, he was a little bit younger, so he was not following. He may have been following with the disciples with some of his family as one of the 70. We don't know, not him per se, but he knew of him. But he was writing down what a lot of people think. He was writing down Peter's remembrances of Jesus. So what automatically occurs to me is like, how do you know there's Elijah and Moses? He saw them, and he immediately said there was Moses. They was with Moses and Elijah. They are seeing into heaven. In heaven, what does it say? We're going to be like him, and we'll know as we are. They knew them because they were in their heavenly realm, in the heavenly bodies. They didn't have any. Moses was like 900 years before, or maybe more than that, and Elijah was like 500 years before. So they didn't have anything. They didn't know. They knew what kind of, it may have been what they were wearing or whatever, but they did know that. They saw them. It also says it represents Moses, which is representing the law, and Elijah represents the prophets, and Jesus representing kind of the New Testament. So that's kind of combining all those three, the Old Testament, which is the two, the prophets and the law, and then the New Testament. And they were conversing. It would be interesting to know what they were talking about. We don't know. But a lot of people think that he was telling them what was going on, what was going to happen, what's letting them know. 1,400 years, it says here, Moses was 1,400 years before Elijah, and Elijah was 900 years before them. So that was a long, long time ago. It was a lot longer. Do you want to read tonight, Iris?
I'll try.
Okay, 5 through 10 there.
Then Peter answered and said to Jesus, Rabbi, it is good for us to be here, and let us make 3 tabernacles, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. Because he did not know what to say, for they were greatly afraid. And a cloud came and overshadowed them, and a voice came out of the cloud, saying, This is my beloved Son, hear him. Suddenly, when they had looked around, they saw no one anymore, but only Jesus with themselves. Now as they came down from the mountain, he commanded them that they should tell no one the things that they had seen, till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. So they kept this word to themselves, questioning what the rising from the dead meant.
Okay. So, again, whenever people come into contact with God or see a bit of heaven, they're totally afraid. It says they were greatly afraid. He didn't know what to say. Peter's the one that, even though he doesn't have anything, he's afraid, he's still got to talk. It's one of those people that they can't keep their mouth shut. And what he said was, let us build 3. He was thinking in his own mind, let's set this up. But what he was saying is, Moses and Elijah are the same as you, and that's not what it was. And that's what Jesus and God spoke. Nope, you don't have it right. This is my Son, in whom I am well pleased. And so,
I love that word says, but only Jesus. But then they saw no one anymore, but only Jesus with him.
Yep, that's right. It was like they opened the door and then they shut the door. And they couldn't see it anymore, and Jesus was coming out to them. And so he told them, don't tell anybody about this. So we're even thinking that they couldn't even tell the other disciples until after his death. Till the Son of Man had risen from the dead. They didn't know what that was. He's told them before, okay, what was going to happen. they're still not understanding. But when they told him, when it's when he tells them when they rise from the dead, when he does rise from the dead, then that clicks in, and they start remembering this, even though they may not have already said these things. It says Luke was the one that tells us Peter, James, and John were all asleep when they awoke and saw Jesus transfigured with Elijah. We say transfiguration, the Mount of Transfiguration, or Jesus was transfigured. That's really a misnomer. We saw him as he should be, as the King of Kings and Lord of Lords. He's always that way. It's just he took on a human form that was different for them to see. So he didn't really change into that. He just let it be known what he was all the time for a certain amount of time. It goes through this and it tells us down there about the Shekinah and how it relates back with the temple and the starting of the temple and the tabernacle, and how all these things was going on. And you can read through that. It's a lot, and it's a lot of good scriptures on it. But God is telling them, just like it was in Moses. Moses spoke, when Moses went on the mountain, what happened? God spoke out of the cloud. Here it is again. The voice from the cloud of glory made it clear that Jesus was not on the same level as Elijah and Moses. He is the beloved Son. So listen to him, hear him. But it left a lasting impression upon him. Peter related what happened in 2 Peter 1:16 and 18. So we see that it made an impression on Peter. You know, that he wrote about it again. He told Mark about it, but then he wrote it again in his book. Okay, let's go to the next one. And they asked him, saying, why do the scribes say that Elijah must come first? Then he answered and told them, indeed, Elijah is coming first and restores all things. And how is it written concerning the Son of Man that he must suffer many things and be treated with contempt? But I say to you that Elijah has also come, and they did to him whatever they wished, as it is written of him. This has a lot of meaning too. The basic meaning is that Elijah was telling them that that there was going to be the coming of man. He told it. It was one of the prophecies. And he said Elijah did come. And in other parts of it, it tells us that John was that forerunner, okay, of Elijah. And they didn't understand him, and they killed him. So we see Elijah did come first and was talking about them. And then he draws it back to himself, where he did the contrast between his first and second comings. The disciples were well aware of the prophecies of the glory of the Messiah. Jesus asked them to consider the prophecies concerning his suffering, and that he must be treated with contempt. And I'm sure they started seeing that already. It's well into his ministry. And they, the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes and everybody's trying to catch him in saying something wrong, or trying to trick him into blasphemy, what they would say was blasphemy. Excuse me. 14 to 18, Brother Everson.
And when he came to the disciples, he saw a great multitude around him, and the scribes disputing with them. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed, and running to him, greeted him. And he asked the scribes, why are you discussing with him? And one of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit, and wherever it seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. So I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not.
Okay, as they was coming down off the mountain and discussing some of these things, Jesus saw his other disciples, the other 9, plus probably some of the others there with them. And the scribes was trying to, probably here again, trying to catch his disciples, trying to get them to say something that that they could use against Jesus. But one in the crowd had a son there that had a mute spirit. This is a demon that he had in him that made him mute. And the prophets, the scribes may have brought this kid out with his father to the disciples to kind of disprove it, because the theory, we talked about it a little bit before, that when the Pharisees and scribes and all them would try to cast one out, the first thing they'd do is try to get his name. What is his name? Well, how are you going to get a name out of a mute person? You're not. So they thought that they may have tricked him, and now it's not going to happen. Jesus is not going to be able to do it. And then already the disciples were kind of curious too, because I'm sure they knew the patterns and the things that the Pharisees and the Sadducees, was thinking at the time. But his father told him, it was just it says my son, we don't know how old he was, but he was still with his parents, so he was probably under 18. We don't know how old he was, but said whenever it sees him, it would throw him down, foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. It's much like the older man with the legion that they had, that he was trying to hurt himself, and we'll see just a little bit later on that he tried to kill him even. So Jesus addresses the demon as a separate being from the boy, as he often does. This makes it difficult to believe that Jesus was merely indulging proper belief in superstition. He evidently regards the demon as the cause, in this case, of a boy's misfortune. He wasn't that he was fortunate because he had a demon in him. So I'll read the next one since it's kind of long. He answered him, Jesus said, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I bear with you? I think it's supposed to be, I left it off. Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him, and when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. So he asked his father, how long has this been happening to him? And he said, from childhood. And often he has thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. Jesus said to him, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. Immediately, the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe, help my unbelief. When Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. Then the spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and he came out of him. And he became as one dead, so that many said, he was dead, he is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he arose. So, after that, the child, how long it had been, we don't know. It was if he was in his teen years, it may have been when he was very young. We don't really know how this happens, but people are induced into this realm back then, and it is today too, that people are endued with demons. Here, his father was trying to tell him how long it had been, what had happened, and all these things. And Jesus didn't have to ask him his name. That was popular back then, like I said, from the Jewish scribes and things. But he just said, get out, get out of him, enter him no more. come out, and he demanded him, deaf and dumb spirit, whatever your name is, I don't care who you are, get out of him. So whether it's one spirit or two, deaf and dumb, or maybe more than that, we don't know. But the spirit then cried out and convulsed him like he was having a convulsion. And he came out of him. So, and then the disciples are just astounded when they see that. They see, what? How could we not do that? That's what they're getting ready to say here in just a minute. It says, but if you can do anything, okay? But the guy said, I believe, help my unbelief. He was willing. He knew Jesus could do it. Otherwise, he wouldn't bring him to him. But he was saying, why my unbelief? Jesus was talking both to his disciples earlier on, O faithless generation, and to the others that was around them. He's getting a little, I don't say ticked off, but a little upset with them that they don't understand. They could have had, and he gave them that authority back when he sent them out. And that authority, hadn't been rebuked as far as we know. And so they should have been able to do it, but they didn't for whatever reason. Okay, Iris, do you want to read 28 and 29?
And when he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, why could we not cast it out? So he said to them, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting.
Okay. So it takes a lot of prayer. And we see, we talked about this a lot, that Jesus went off to pray a lot of times. So it took it more than just the prayer, it took fasting too. They had to submit themselves unto God so they would be able to do it. The verses is the King James, because I put them in there. Now, some of his commentary is from another version. I think it may be the NIV. So, whenever there is anything else. And that's, sometimes I've wondered, because I'm copying it out of the,
you read scripture sometimes and you read them and you say, like that, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. I mean, that's stronger sometimes than we quoted that scripture.
That's right. That's right. We have to be, he's chiding them a little bit. It's like, okay, you don't play games. This is one of the tough games. This is a hard one. You have to really, understand. And that's what he's saying. It's not that we can pray more, and it goes back and forth. You have to weigh it, because the Pharisee prays a lot, but that's not what he's wanting. He's wanting the intensity, the contact with God, and know who God is and who you are in God. And that's what Jesus does. He knows him. He keeps saying, I'm doing the will of my Father, telling the disciples, telling them exactly who he was, and they didn't. Okay, yeah, I'm the Son of Man, we get that. But they didn't really get it.
Going back to prayer there, when Jesus, the example he gave, he said, not an example, but when he prayed there in the garden, he said, Lord, let this cup pass from me. But then, that's what he wanted.
Yes.
Sometimes we pray, we ask God, that's what we want. But then he said, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. A lot of times, where it says, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find. But it all goes back to the will of God.
Right.
And his sovereignty. If I had the faith, could I pray the prayer of faith and Liz been healed? You know what I mean? But, when we want somebody to, but at the same time, nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done.
One of I think the key issues that we saw last year, last season, when the little Reva got killed, it's like, why that's not in the Bible. That's not anything like that. No, that particular person and that particular thing was not there. But, yes, that is in the Bible. Sometimes God's answer is no. And we, that may have got where they're coming from, that may have got Thomas doubting, which I'm sure would have if that's what happened. We don't know why Thomas had his fears or his unanswered things. But this is part of it. And seeing things like this, like where they couldn't do it and Jesus could, I mean, that kind of upset you a little bit. Kind of like, okay, what are we doing wrong? Am I holding my mouth wrong or doing this? And it's not that at all. And I thought it was so powerful when Jesus said, the Father is the one that allows it. I can't do except what the Father wants me to do. It's one of those things that we don't understand it. And if we prayed and somebody stayed alive, they may have been vegetable or something, never would have been any better. And that's selfish for us. We want them to stay there, but it's hard. It's real hard. Brother Everson, 30 and 32 to 32.
Then they departed from there and passed through Galilee, and he did not want anyone to know it, for he taught his disciples, and he said to them, the Son of Man is being betrayed into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And after he was killed, he will raise the third day. But they did not understand this saying, and they were afraid to ask him.
Okay, we see a lot of times, there are some teachers that I sat under that you could ask them anything, questions. And then you'd ask, some of the teachers was like, why, are you an idiot? Did you not get it the first time? It's like, no, I'm sorry, I did. You're going to have to go over it again, or read it to me or show me where I can get, because you're not telling me how I can understand this. And that's kind of what they were afraid. I think that, well, okay, we wasn't able to do the demon. We wasn't able to do this. We better not ask him about that. He's going to get he don't think we know nothing. It's kind of the way I would look at it. So, but after it all happened, like I said before, after it all happened, when Jesus was resurrected, then they started remembering all these things that he told them. Don't tell us till after then. And, I understand why he said they're going to be raised 3 days later and all this. They just did not want to. But he had a time that he wanted to get away, so they went back up through Galilee and went back to a certain place, probably in a house. In verse 33 through 34, Iris, there at the bottom.
Then he came to Capernaum, and when he was in the house, he asked them, what was it you disputed among yourselves on the road? But they kept silent, for on the road they had disputed among themselves who would be the greatest.
Okay. And we don't know how long, they were traveling, so it's probably less than a day here, but they couldn't understand what Jesus was telling them, so they just go on about their business. And he had said before, when he's coming again, they are focused on that. They're so focused, their history, their learning, everything that they had, the Messiah is going to set us free. So they were looking at that and seeing with that, and the kingdom's coming. Jesus told them, the kingdom's already here. He told them that with when Peter had his understanding of who Jesus was. The kingdom has already come. It's here. It's starting. You're starting to learn about it. Well, the first thing they want to do, who's going to be first in that kingdom? Can I be up there with you? Can I be there close? Can I be second? And that's what they were talking about as they were walking to Capernaum. So, but they didn't want to tell him, because that's a little bit, it's kind of like asking the boss for a raise. You always have to ask the boss for a raise. I've been here so long, I was a raise.
Or don't want to ask him how you're doing, or might not.
Yeah, he'll tell you. Try it. And that's where we see in Mark, Matthew, where, even the mother of James and John gets involved, and Luke, they get involved and wants to know. So what he did, he sat them down. It says, he sat them down, called the 12, and said to them, if anyone desires to be first, he shall be last of all and servant of all. Then he took a little child and set him in the midst of them. And when he had taken him in his arms, he said to them. So he was starting to tell them, okay, this kingdom that I'm going to have is different than anything else that you have that's here. The Roman people, the human nature wants to be first, but you're going to have to be last, is what it tells them. 38 through 42, brother.
Now John answered him, saying, Teacher, we saw someone who does not follow us casting out demons in your name, and we forbade him because he does not follow us. But Jesus says, do not forbid him, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. For he who is not against me is on our side. For whoever gives you a cup of water to drink in my name, because you belong to Christ, assuredly, I say to you, he will by no means lose his reward. But whosoever causes one of these little ones who believe in me to stumble, it would be better for him to have a millstone hung around his neck and he was thrown into the sea.
See, I didn't capture 37. John said them down. He said unto them, I missed 37. Whosoever shall receive one of such children in my name receiveth me, and whosoever shall receive me receiveth not me, but him that sent me. Okay, that was Jesus talking, telling them. And he brought the child in there to show them. What does a child do? Tell a child to do something, they go do it. And they believe it too, My papa says he can do this, or he can do that, or my dad says he can do that. So John answered him here when he's telling them. He said, look, it's kind of like, we don't want to be left out here. We've seen other people out here casting out demons and healing people and all this stuff, and they wouldn't following you. He said, that's okay. That's all right. We need those people. We don't know who these people were. They may have been some that were following John the Baptist and had heard about Christ and was speaking in Christ's name, or all these things, but wasn't actually following after Christ like the disciples were. May have been somebody that had gone to one of these meetings and saw what had happened, and kind of like one of the disciples started teaching. Could be like an Apollos or all these other. But Jesus is telling them, kind of like, if they're not against us, they're for us.
When Amber was real small, being a preacher's kid here, about healing, my mother fell, crushed her arm, and she couldn't hardly raise it up. And one night, Amber stayed all night with her. My dad slept in one bedroom, and Amber slept with her grandmother, and it was hurting, so Amber was going to pray for her. She grabbed that arm, and she said, in Jesus' name, heal my grandma, and just went up with it. Mom said she almost screamed out loud because it hurt so bad. She saw scars. But then when she put her arm down,
it's okay.
It's okay. And she never had to have surgery. But Amber, you told her something, and like you said,
having the faith of a little child is something precious. We need to have that faith. That's kind of what would have been back. That's what Jesus was trying to tell them all the way back with the other ones, that healing of the demon. That you have to have this innocent faith that what I say, if it's right, what you say, and it's asking in Jesus' name, it'll be done. And he says, anything, do not forbid them, for no one who works a miracle in my name can soon afterwards speak evil of me. If they even give a cup of cold water to someone, he wanted his ministry to spread out. Okay? The disciples didn't, they wanted the glory for themselves. They're still human. They still wanted to see that. In one of the episodes I remember, says this never gets old. You know, he's saying that a miracle, Jesus is going to do a miracle. And one of them is saying, this never gets old. I never, you know. But Jesus was trying to teach them that this is the time, that it needs, you know, this is not only what I came for, but this is what to help people. But he tells them, whosoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to stumble, it would be better for him a millstone. You know what a millstone is? Y'all probably know. It's what they use to grind the wheat, grind the olives, grind the whatever, the wheat, the corn, all that stuff. And they had different sizes. They had little ones that you could use there. You know, they have a mortar and pestle. I made one of those in art class when I was in 8th grade. Fired that baby up. I think it got lost. I never did use it, I don't think. But the big ones, they have to have big animals, usually a team, an oxen or whatever, go around and around and move that rock. And it's a huge rock. And it's what it's saying. It's probably 100 pounds or more weighing down on that. If you put that on your neck, nobody's going to be kicked up, you know. And that's what he's saying. Nobody cast them into the sea, because we don't want to hurt that faith of that little child. They need to have that faith. Iris 43 through 48, on page 48.
If your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter into life maimed rather than having two hands to go to hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. It is better for you to enter life lame rather than having 2 feet to be cast into hell, into the fire that shall never be quenched, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. And if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire, where their worm does not die and the fire is not quenched.
Okay. This is something that a lot of people take very seriously, as far as they think you ought to do this. This is, you got to think though, okay? If I pluck an eye out and I still have an eye, or pluck both eyes out, I'm going to do that, I can still think bad thoughts. That doesn't make it any different. What Jesus is trying to say here is you need to get rid of that, whatever that is, from your life. Take that out, get it out, so now you can go on about your business. If you think, you know, laming yourself, cutting your leg off is going to help, that's not, you're still, you know, not going to be able to walk to those places. Well, your mind is such that it can still do things without even having to go out of a wheelchair or go out of a chair. So we have to understand, he's trying to say, get these out. It's just like when he's talking about get the beam out of your own eye. When you're looking at somebody else's eye that has a speck in it. We are, he's overemphasizing, that's what it's saying. He's going beyond, up and beyond, but we need to we're in this central world. We need to be careful with what our mind sees, what our ears hear, all that things that we learned a long time ago, because that is what Jesus is telling us. We need to be better. Cut that sin out, whatever that sin is, and then we'll be ready for it. Because some people, they think, I mean, you go back to the Pharisees and the Sadducees, their rules are solid rules. They said, oh, we got to keep these rules. And Jesus had told them, he said, no, you're doing these things, but not because of a rule, because something that you thought of after Moses gave the law. That's not what they're doing. He's saying you need to use your head. Okay? All these things come up, these sins. We can think about them and dwell on them, or we can cast them out. And that's what we have to do.
There, where it says they thought of the kingdom mainly in terms of reward, not in terms of sacrifice.
Right.
It costs something to go to heaven.
It does.
Every time I thought, wasn't it when David was buying the threshing floor, God was going to give it to him.
Yeah.
And he said, hey man, I appreciate it much more if I had to buy it.
Yeah.
What have I done if you give that to me? And hey man, serve the Lord. It's not all. It is reward.
It is.
But it's also sacrifice.
It's one of those things that it's not always up in the air either. I mean, it's not always half good. You're not always on the hilltop, the mountaintop. You're in the valleys a lot.
It's like going on a vacation. You may work hard and save your money and plan and do without for a while. But then when you take your vacation, you got a reward.
That's right.
Doing it.
That's right. In the last couple of scriptures, for everyone will be seasoned with fire, and every sacrifice will be seasoned with salt. Salt is good, but if the salt loses its flavor, how will you season it? Have salt in yourselves and have peace with one another. What does salt do? It seasons it, it preserves it. And that's what he's saying. Get these things out of your life, and then season yourself. Have the salt in it to keep them out. Keep that from the body degrading. And then, and it talks about be seasoned with fire. When they talk about when you melt gold, silver, or anything out, and it's got some junk in it, some dross, comes to the top, you scoop that out, throw it out. Then you'll have pure gold. That's what it's saying, that it's going to have to pass through the fire. We're going to have to pass through a fire, not,
Billy used to make lead weights. He made some pretty good size ones. But he'd buy a big chunk of lead. The lead is soft.
Yeah.
It's hard, but it's solid.
Yeah.
But and a lot of times you drop it, it picks up stuff. And that little smell, the little flamethrower, and the little pot, he'd put a chunk in there. And then he'd get him a little lead, because all that stuff would rise up to the top, and he'd skim it off the top where he had nothing but pure lead, and he poured it in that mold.
Yeah, because it can break, or if it has an imperfection or whatever, come apart. And that's what he wants us to do, to get ourselves ready. He's telling us, get our bodies ready for it, and then you'll be ready as you go through these tests and these trials and these things. So he's just telling them it's difficult. It's some of the things we don't quite understand. It says the first main interpretation is fire refers to tribulation and suffering. Well, just like you said, we're going to get there. It's going to be through some suffering. It's not going to be through everything. But just as every sacrifice under the law, it required salt, so the living sacrifice my followers bring to me must be seasoned with suffering and tribulation. Go back and read what we read as we studied Numbers and Leviticus. It said, bring your bread, bring your flour, but season it with salt. Put that salt. It's a preservant. It kills things. It keeps it going, things like that. And that's what it's telling us. So I appreciate everybody coming out. And that's again until next week.